Dear students, let's talk about the chief characteristics of metaphysical poetry. Concentration. Concentration is one of the major features of metaphysical poetry. A metaphysical poem tends to be short and is always closely woven, and so there is some truth when it is said a metaphysical poem is an expanded epigram. The reader is held to an idea or a line or argument. He is not allowed to pause and ponder over a passage. Metaphysical poetry demands that we pay attention and read on. The following examples will show how there is a compression of ideas. A bracelet of bright hair about the bone. This is from the poem The Relief. The phonics riddle hath more wit, by us we two being one are it. These lines are from the poem The Canonization. The desire for concentration and precision marks also the verse forms of the metaphysical poets. They invented verse forms which suited them to express the diversity of the poetic experience. They preferred a line of 8 syllables to a line of 10, and they employed stanzas of varying length into which the sense was packed. Helen Gardner has aptly summarized this feature in her introduction to the metaphysical poets thus: a stanza of Donne or Herbert is not, like rhyme royal or a Spenserian stanza, an idle mould into which the words have flowed. It is more like a limiting frame in which words and thoughts are compressed. The metaphysical poets favored either very simple verse forms, octosyllabic couplets or quatrains, or else stanzas created for the particular poem in which length of line and rhyme scheme artfully enforce the sense. Metaphysical conceit. A striking feature of metaphysical poetry is its fondness for conceit. A conceit is a comparison whose ingenuity is more striking than its justness. All comparisons discover likeness in things unlike. A comparison becomes a conceit when we are made to conceive likeness while being strongly conscious of unlikeness. Elizabethan poetry teems with conceits. They are used as ornaments, but on the contrary, a metaphysical conceit is not indulged in for its own sake. It is used to persuade, or it is used to define or to prove a point. In a metaphysical poem, the conceits are instruments of definition in an argument or instruments to persuade. An excellent example of a conceit is to be found in the poem A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, where a pair of lovers are compared to a pair of compasses. The relevant lines are: if they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move what doth if the other do, and though it in the centre sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows exact as that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me. By using the analogy of the compass at the time of his bidding farewell, the poet persuades his wife not to be mournful. We speak of a pair of compasses, yet the pair is one thing. In the same way, the two lovers are one. The poet must depart, and his beloved must stay back. She controls him, however distant he may be. She is his center, and is the cause of that perfection in his life which is serialized by a circle. The lines quoted illustrate the argumentative and persuasive qualities we meet with in metaphysical poetry. Learnedness. The metaphysical poets were men of learning, and their poems were laden with scholarship. Being learned, they tried to be singular and novel in their thoughts. As Johnson rightly commented, they wanted to say what they hoped had been never said before. That is why they ransacked nature and art for illustrations, comparisons, and allusions. Dr. Johnson noted that the metaphysical poets sometimes drew their conceits from recesses of learning not very much frequented by common readers of poetry. They did not follow the trodden path. They had their own thoughts, and they worked out a new way to give expression to their thoughts. As Sir Walter Scott says, they played with thoughts as the Elizabethans had played with words. Mechanism of sensibility. The wide learning of the metaphysical poets had become a part of poetic sensibility, and it proved itself to be of utmost value to them in discovering analogy in the midst of the most diverse kinds of experience. T.S. Eliot, in his essay, The Metaphysical Poet, writes, when a poet's mind is perfectly equipped for its work, it is constantly amalgamating uh, disparate experience. The ordinary man's experience is chaotic, irregular, and fragmentary. The latter falls in love or reads Spinoza, and these two experiences have nothing to do with each other or with the noise of the typewriter, the smell of cooking in the minds of the poet. These experiences are always forming new wholes. Eliot goes on to say that the poets of the 17th century possessed a mechanism of sensibility which could devour any kind of experience. Unification of sensibility. The most striking characteristics of the metaphysical poets is their possession of what T.S. Eliot calls unification of sensibility. The phrase denotes the fusion of thought and emotion. Grayson rightly points out that the peculiar blend of thought and passion, feeling and ratiocination is the greatest achievement of the metaphysical poets. The metaphysical poets fed their thought. In these poets, there is a direct sensuous apprehension of thought or a recreation of thought into feeling. As James Reeves says, intellect and emotion are inseparably united. They exist in harmony, not in opposition in these poets. But on the contrary, in the poems of Wordsworth, Shelley, or other romantic poets, there is a tension between the two, that is, between thought and feeling. They are rarely united. We cannot imagine Donne sighing as Keats did for a life of sensation rather than of thoughts. Donne's poem Song is a clear illustration of unified sensibility. The poem begins thus: Sweetest love, I do not go for weariness of thee, nor in hope the world can show a fitter love for me. But since that I must die at last, 'tis best to use myself in jest, thus by feigned deaths to die. The poem has for its themes valediction, and in the above lines, the poet by passionate arguments consoles his wife. The poet is not leaving his beloved because he wants to, but death will part them in the end. His absence from her will therefore be a rehearsal of death. The poet goes on arguing passionately, and the following lines from the same poem denote the integration of thought and feeling. When thou sighest not wind, but sowest my soul away. When thou weepest unkindly kind, my life's blood doth decay. It cannot be thou that thou lovest me, as thou sayest, if in thine my life thou waste, thou art the best of me. Cynicism. Cynicism is a quality that stands out prominently in the erotic verse of the metaphysicals. It was the fashion to write love poems in the manner of Petrarch, idealizing the lady and falsifying the poet. The lady was placed on a pedestal of unattainable perfection, at the foot of which the lover sighed and groaned. Donne rebelled against this artificiality, and he wrote love poems in an original and realistic vein. So realistic was he about the nature of women that his poems tend to be cynical. The following lines are illustrative of this quality. I am two fools, I know, for loving and for saying so in whining poetry. These lines are from the triple fool. I can love her and you and you. I can love any, so she be not true. These lines are from the poem The Indifferent. Brutal cynicism pervades even Donne's elegies and divine poems. For example, Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. These lines are from the poem Holy Sonnet 10. Unconventional openings. Donne's age saw an immense development of the drama, and Donne himself was a great frequenter to plays. Like him, his followers also possessed strong dramatic imagination. Many of the poems of the metaphysicals open in an abrupt manner, thereby arresting the attention of the reader from the very outset. Examples from conventional and abrupt openings are found in For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. These are the lines from the canonization. Then the lines from Sun Rising. Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou Thus, metrical harshness compared with the mellifluous poetry of the Elizabethans, the verse of the metaphysical appears to be harsh and staccato. Donne himself averred, I sing not siren like to tempt. It has been correctly pointed out that Donne's harshness cannot be divorced from his poetic experience. Harshness is an integral part of the poetry of the metaphysicals. Grierson has observed that Donne's harshness is not a sign of his carelessness or indifference to his art. In this connection, Grierson writes of Donne, thus, he writes as one who will say what he has to say without regard to conventions of poetic diction or smooth verse, but what he has to say is subtle and surprising, and so are the metrical effects with which it is presented. Now, the charge of obscurity which is placed against these poets. One of the charges against metaphysical poetry is its obscurity. Very often, Ben Jonson's statement is quoted in support of it, but in reality, the charge of obscurity cannot be sustained. Metaphysical poetry may be difficult, but then difficulty is not obscurity. Metaphysical poetry makes demands upon the reader and challenges him to make it out. It does not attempt to attract the lazy. Metaphysical poetry is close packed and dense with meaning. It has got to be chewed and digested. Difficulty in certain places may arise due to the structure of the verse, but as Eliot points out, this is not a vice, it is fidelity to thought and feeling. Recondite imagery and juxtapositions of the remorse with the near, the concrete with the abstract, and the sublime with the commonplace may also render a poem difficult. The following lines from the poem, The Canonization, may be difficult but not obscure. Call her near, me another fly. Call her one, me another fly. We are tapers too, and at out own cost die. And we in us find the eagle and the dove. The funnet's riddle hath more wit by us, we two being one are it. We conclude by quoting Helen Gardner. Difficulty is indeed the main demerit in this way of writing for those who dislike it. It is one of its merit for those who approve it. Devices used in metaphysical poetry. Metaphysical poets like John Donne use complex dramatic experience and a variety expressions and a variety of literary devices like extended conceits, paradoxes, and imagery in colloquial and personal language that challenges ideas of morality, traditional love, and carnality. It is intellectually inventive, even jarring sometimes because it mixes and links two unlike things to create extended metaphors and anecdotes that is unique in comparison to previous poets of his era, particularly Edmund Spenser. Now, to conclude, the revival of interest in the poetry of Donne and his followers has been regarded as one of the most significant features of modern English poetry. This revival of interest is not the result of a shifting literary taste, but a deep rooted similarity between the age of Donne and of our own age. R. G. Cox writes relevantly the interest shown by our age in the period from Donne to Marvel, and especially in the poetry of metaphysical wit, amounts almost to a discovery. The experience of flux and transition in the present century seems to have given us an understanding denied to the 18th century, to the Victorians, and even to the Romantics, to those poets of our times who have struggled to bring poetry back into relation with the widest possible range of experience and to fuse thought and feeling in one act of imaginative apprehension. Donne and his followers are seen to be particularly relevant. Thank you.